When you hear the word volcano, what comes to mind? For some of us, images of bubbling lava may flash before our eyes. Others might recall Mount Vesuvius destroying Pompeii in 79 AD. But for those who know about it, Yellowstone National Park's supervolcano evokes the most fear. Yellowstone lies in the northwest corner of the U.S., in the eponymous Yellowstone National Park. Over the past 14,000 years, the region has experienced 3 supervolcanic eruptions so large they rocked the entire planet. The park today sits atop a massive magma chamber stretching around 43 by 29 miles, or 70 by 47 kilometers. It's this chamber and its potential reactivation that worries experts. But are we all doomed if it blows again? And is there another Yellowstone in the works somewhere else? You're about to find out. Here's what would happen if Yellowstone erupted again. Also, stick around to the end of the video where we'll explore a potential second Yellowstone lurking in Europe. Yellowstone's magma chamber is one of the largest on Earth and has produced some truly gargantuan eruptions in the past. Its history can be broken down into 3 periods of activity. The first was between 2.1 and 1.3 million years ago when the hotspot first formed. During this period, the magma wasn't contained within a single chamber, but spread across a much larger area and wasn't nearly as deep. As a result, the eruptions were even more widespread and created calderas several miles wide. The next period started around 1.3 million years ago and ended 640,000 years ago. This time, the magma chamber began to take shape as the hotspot became more stationary. Eruptions were less frequent but far from over. In fact, at 640,000 years ago, one of the worst occurred during this phase. The event emptied 2,500 cubic miles or 10,000 cubic kilometers of material from the magma chamber. For reference, that's enough ash to cover the entire state of Montana under 2 inches or 5 centimeters of ash. These 2 phases pale in comparison to the last period of activity, however. Around 20,000 years ago, the magma chamber took its current form and unleashed its power just 3 times, each time creating an enormous caldera. The first of these 3, the Huckleberry Ridge eruption, remains the largest in history, with 2,800 cubic miles or 12,000 cubic kilometers of debris ejected. So while it's been quiet for around 12,000 years, that doesn't mean it won't blow again. In fact, scientists expect it to. According to geologists at the U.S. Geological Survey's Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, a 4th eruption is overdue. On average, eruptions occur every 600,000 years, so at the current rate, we could be due for one soon. There are other signs indicating an eruption is inevitable. Hot springs and geysers bubble across the park today. These are the telltale signs of a brewing magma chamber heating up the rock above it. Furthermore, seismic activity has picked up since the early 1980s. There have been thousands of earthquakes recorded, most of them minor and too weak to be felt. Yet some have reached a magnitude of 4 or higher. While not big enough to erupt the volcano on their own, these events indicate magma pushing up through the crust. If the pressure becomes great enough, it could lead to a massive explosion. So what happens if it does? First, there would be an earthquake. The ground would shake as the magma violently breaches the surface. Then the hot magma would begin to pool. As it continues to rise, it would displace huge amounts of rock. Some of this would be pushed aside, creating a ring-shaped depression known as a caldera. As the magma continued to rise, it would eventually overflow the sides of the existing caldera, creating outward-facing depressions. Meanwhile, the rising magma would continue to displace rock until the land beneath it collapses. This collapse would feed more magma to the growing pile on the surface. It would also produce pyroclastic flows, extremely hot mixtures of gas and solid matter that race down the sides of the volcano at up to 400 miles per hour, or 644 kilometers per hour. Pyroclastic flows would consist of hot ash and rock and reach temperatures as high as 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,000 degrees Celsius. As the eruption continues, the growing cloud of ash would reach the stratosphere and begin to circle the globe. Each time the magma chamber has emptied in the past, this has happened. The first 2,000 years following the eruption would be particularly harsh. Ash would blanket the surrounding states and disrupt global weather patterns. The lack of sunlight and general cooling effect could cause an ice age. Plants and animals would go extinct, and humans would face food shortages and freezing temperatures. It would be a mass extinction event unlike anything in the past 65 million years. It might sound dramatic, but it's really not that uncommon in the history of our planet. However, scientists believe the real danger might lie not with the initial blast, but with what comes after. 1,000 years after the eruption, the magma chamber would likely be empty, yet geothermal activity would continue in the newly formed caldera. Hot water and steam would escape through cracks in the earth, producing immense heat and pressure. Eventually, this would lead to another series of earthquakes and the formation of a new mountain range. Over millions of years, this would return the region to near its original form. So it might seem that once the initial eruption concludes, things will return to normal. That, however, wouldn't be the case. The reason is something called the Yellowstone caldera. Formed during the last eruption, it spans 45 by 28 miles, or 72 by 45 kilometers. Most of the caldera lies within the borders of Yellowstone National Park, but it also extends into the surrounding states of Idaho and Montana. The thing is, the caldera isn't actually a caldera, it's a supervolcano. This means that should the Yellowstone magma chamber ever fill again, there's nowhere for the displaced rock to go. It would spill over the top and down the sides of the caldera. This would produce the largest eruption in history. The initial explosion would blanket much of North America in ash, causing crop failures and global cooling. Pyroclastic flows would flatten everything in their path, and the hot ash cloud would choke the skies. Even the air we breathe would become unsafe as toxic gases filled the atmosphere. For humans, the fallout could be even worse. High concentrations of sulfur dioxide could cause acid rain, which would destroy crops and poison waterways. Fine particulate matter known as PM2.5 would pollute the air we breathe and cause respiratory damage. We don't know exactly what the effects would be, since nothing like this has happened in modern history. But the risks are obviously very high. Even if the world didn't end, life as we know it would cease to exist. So how likely is a second Yellowstone eruption? Scientists say there's no need to worry right now. It could be hundreds of thousands of years before the magma chamber refills. But there are smaller volcanoes nearby that could erupt much sooner. Take, for instance, the Hebgen Buttes, a group of cinder cones and lava domes just south of Yellowstone. Just 13,000 years ago, it was here where the last eruption in the region occurred. It blew with the force of an atomic bomb and sent 100 million tons of ash into the air. Today it smolders quietly, but it could erupt again. Scientists at the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory monitor the Hebgen Buttes closely. They've identified 14 areas where future eruptions are possible. Local residents are prepared and would likely face few issues in the event of an eruption. Ash would smother crops and livestock, and fine particles would irritate lungs. But local authorities are well trained and would issue timely warnings. In fact, officials have a plan in place for the entire region known as the Yellowstone Super-Eruption Response Plan. Should the main caldera erupt, it would be too big for anyone to respond to. The focus would be on helping people cope with the aftermath and surviving the ensuing winter. What about Europe? As it turns out, there's another supervolcano hiding in plain sight. Most people visit Naples, Italy, for its beautiful coastline, rich history, and delicious pizza. What they don't realize is that it's also home to Campi Flegrei, which translates to burning fields. This area consists of a group of volcanoes near the city. It's actually a caldera formed by multiple eruptions over the past 30,000 years. The last eruption was around 3,900 years ago and produced only small amounts of lava. However, scientists believe Campi Flegrei is long overdue. It has the potential to blow with the force of 300 atomic bombs and unleash 60 cubic kilometers of molten lava. Just 200 years ago, it rumbled back to life, shaking the ground and forcing locals to flee. While it hasn't erupted since, scientists think the pressure is building. In recent decades, the ground has risen up to 12 inches or 30 centimeters and produced thousands of small earthquakes. Some have been as powerful as 3.5 on the Richter scale. That's roughly equivalent to an explosive eruption at Yellowstone. Like Yellowstone, Campi Flegrei is being monitored by a dedicated team of experts. The Istituto Nazionale di Geofisica e Vulcanologia keeps watch over the volcano at all times. Should it erupt, they'll be ready. Of course, a Campi Flegrei eruption wouldn't have the same far-reaching effects as a Yellowstone one. Ash and lava would likely remain confined to Italy and nearby countries. Still, the death toll could be high. Naples is home to 4 million people. They would have only hours to evacuate the city before molten lava reached its outskirts. Eruptions of this size normally produce pyroclastic flows that travel at 100 miles per hour or 161 kilometers per hour. Once they reached the city, there would be no escape. Entire buildings would be vaporized and turned to ash. Those who managed to get out in time would have to flee to other parts of Italy. With roads likely destroyed, they'd have no choice but to head north towards Rome. This would overwhelm the city's infrastructure and lead to more deaths. The economic impact would be felt worldwide. Italy's economy relies heavily on tourism. Campi Flegrei's eruption would put an end to that and bring Italy to its knees. So it looks like the risk of another Yellowstone is relatively low. At least for now, the best way to mitigate the damage would be to leave early and often.